Hello, I'm Giles Darling and I write novels, plays and non-fiction books. In this video I continue to show an example of how to create dozens of story ideas from a what-if moment. This follows the process outlined in my How to Create Story Ideas videos, which I include a link to below. So let's ask some more open-ended questions about voting reform. Question 3. When is the story set? Options include the past, the present day, the near future, the distant future, or some combination of these. If the story idea is set in the past, it could be based on real-life actual advances in voting reform, such as overturning corruption, for example rotten borough boundary reform here in the UK in the 1800s, or expanding the electorate to include more people, for example votes for women, in most countries in the 20th century. The story idea could also take place in ancient times, such as under the Egyptian pharaohs, the ancient Greeks or the Roman Empire. Or it could take place in more recent times, from the medieval period through more recent history to the modern day. Alternatively, the story idea could focus on characters in the past with ideas ahead of their time, for example trying and potentially failing to change the voting system to something like modern-day universal suffrage. These people could be based on actual historical figures, or they could just be figments of your imagination, maybe subordinates whose identities and names never made it into the history books. Why did they remain anonymous? This could create the foundations for an interesting story idea. Setting the story idea in the present day allows it to focus on current political issues and contemporary demands for voting reforms. What are the challenges your main characters face? Why was past voting reform unsuccessful, and what has now changed to make it more likely? However, there are two problems with setting your story idea in the present day. Firstly, it risks being overtaken by current events. For example, by the time you have written your story and got it published, it could easily be out of date. Secondly, unless you have close personal experience of this issue, your story idea risks seeming inauthentic. Setting your story idea in the near future helps avoid some of these present-day story idea risks. There are also two further advantages. Firstly, you can assume that people in the near future will think and behave much as they do today, for example their political opinions and their daily routines. Similarly, technology in the near future will probably be similar to today's technology. This will make it easier to create a believable story idea. Secondly, your story idea can take place in the run-up to, during and the aftermath of a significant event that hasn't occurred yet in the present day. This event could be local or global, minor or major, or constructive or destructive. Your story idea can also imagine the consequences, both expected and unexpected, of the subsequent voting reform on the political establishment and on wider society. Setting the story idea in the distant future enables it to investigate the longer-term consequences of voting reform. This could be particularly interesting for types of voting reform that completely overturn present-day systems. For example, some types of voting reform call for much greater use of referendums or plebiscites, but how often should these mass votes be called? If it's annually or maybe biennially, then not much will get decided. However, if it's monthly, quarterly, or perhaps biannually, would the costs of repeatedly holding these referendums become too much? Would people eventually get fed up and turn their backs on politics? Similarly, how wide a range of issues should these referendums cover? Would people vote on minor issues, such as whether it's legal to stick a stamp upside down on an envelope, as well as on major issues, such as whether to engage in a foreign military operation? This would require voters to have an unrealistically wide range of knowledge and opinions, which could lead to many of them disengaging from politics altogether. As a result, single-issue interest groups could end up with an undemocratic influence. How would this play out in the long term? It's also worth considering how voters would react if a referendum result is very close or even a tie. Is a simple majority acceptable, or would some higher percentage be required, for example a two-thirds majority? But who would decide? Another type of voting reform suggests replacing the current single overarching type of government with smaller parallel assemblies that each have powers over individual aspects of society and its daily life. For example, maybe one assembly would be in charge of the nation's education, another assembly in charge of the nation's health, and further multiple assemblies in charge of other concerns like transport, employment, defence, law and order, etc. Who decides how taxpayer money is distributed between all these parallel assemblies? No doubt inter-assembly rivalry would flourish and the running of the country could grind to a halt. Setting your story idea in the distant future also allows your imagination to run wild. What if computers become sentient with the spread of artificial intelligence? Would their idea of voting reform be to ban humans voting altogether? Could humans prevent this? How would we fight back? Who would win? Similarly, if aliens from another planet arrive on their spaceships and take control of Earth, would they impose voting reform? Would politicians here on Earth try to negotiate a compromise? In a twist to the story idea, maybe the aliens have never encountered democracy before. Would they adopt it themselves on their home planet? Can you think of other radical types of voting reform? What would their long-term consequences look like? Please leave your suggestions in this video's comments. Thank you for watching this video. Please feel free to use any of these story ideas for your own novels, plays, screenplays and TV scripts. To see me ask yet more open-ended questions for story ideas about voting reform, please watch my next follow-up video. Please also check out the rest of my YouTube channel, especially where I discuss the various books that I've written. I hope my channel encourages you to buy my books and to read them if you haven't already done so. Finally, please feel free to leave comments below and to like and subscribe this video and my YouTube channel. Don't be a stranger.